Good evening, council, staff, members of the public. May I have a mover and seconder to call the meeting to order, please? I'm Deputy Cabral and Councillor Alexander. The special meeting of the Council of the Township of Springwater on May 8th, 2024 come to order at 6 p.m. All those in favor? And that has carried. Councillor, are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest this evening? And not seeing any, we'll now call upon Tony Georges to make his presentation.
Thank you, Your Worship. Your Worship, Deputy Mayor, members of council, thank you for the invitation to attend this evening. I just wanted to start off by giving you a little bit of background in terms of how this evening came to be. As a point of clarity, I reached out to my ward councillor a number of years ago about a utility issue that I was experiencing in my area, and through a series of emails, we ended up, I think I was put in contact with the CAO, and the CAO then put me in touch with the utility. And so I haven't found resolution to that issue. And so recently I reached out to the councillor again, and we ended up on a phone call, and one thing led to another. We started to talk about current events. And she'd asked me if I'd ever experienced some of the things that council is encountering right now. And so I said, we sure did. Very similar, in fact, and over a number of years. Led us to further conversations. And so she said, would you ever consider coming in and speaking to council? So I said, sure. So here we are. Simple as that. So with that, I thought I would come in and provide you with some background in terms of what my experience looked like joining council in 2000. Very different than what council in the township looks like today. So I think there is some value in sharing with you some of those building blocks that were the foundation of an amalgamated municipality and how we came to be, and perhaps some of the policies and issues you're dealing with today that are still lingering from 30 years ago. So my personal move to Springwater Township, I grew up in Angus, lived in Barrie. My backyard was Vesper Township. And in 1993, I moved into Vesper Township. And my son was born in 94, and so was Springwater Township. And so he lived in the new amalgamated municipality. I had some interaction with the township through applying for building permits and different things. And back then in the 90s, there was a real challenge in that different departments were in different locations throughout the township. There was not an administration center initially until they rented. So if you pull into the county administration center, the administration center was the bottom floor of the right-hand side of the county administration center. We had about 5,000 square feet in there. And and so I went in there for a building permit, and there was stacks of documents that needed to be gone through from the amalgamation. So there was no Springwater official plan, and there was no Springwater zoning bylaw. It was all the amalgamated documents, and you kind of had to work with staff to get through what would be appropriate in that time. So jump forward to 1999, I met Helen Coots for the first time, who was warden of the county at the time. She attended my father's funeral. And I remember that being a very important time and moment for my family that the warden had showed up for that. 2000 rolled around, and I got a couple of phone calls that it was a week before the cutoff for elections for Springwater Township, and there was nobody running in Ward 4, week to go. So I was asked about it, and I said, look, I have 2 young children. I have 2 businesses. I'm the sole breadwinner in my home. It's not a good time. I can't do it. Then there was another pitch that, hey, if nobody puts their name in, you can go. It's a couple meetings a month. It's not a big deal. And if somebody puts their name in, you can take your name out. So lo and behold, last day, somebody put their name in, and I was in the election and couldn't get my name out. So that's how I started in Springwater Township politics. The elections were a little different then. I didn't have any signs. I printed a one-page brochure. I knocked doors throughout the ward sporadically. And it was a very interesting response. Everything that I was told that people would talk to me about were never mentioned. Every issue was different. Walking down Sunnydale Road, there was a lot of people that were convinced that they lived in Barrie. There was a whole string of houses on the south side across from the new development back then that were convinced that they had bought their house through a Barrie realtor. They had bought their house through a Barrie lawyer. They had a Barrie mortgage. They paid their taxes through the Barrie bank, and they were sure they lived in Barrie. And it was so convincing that I had to go back and check with the clerk to make sure where the boundaries were of the township. In fact, during the election, there were the Mayor of Barrie signs on the south side of Springwater's Sunnydale Road. So that's how different things were. So it was a very quiet campaign. We didn't have a lot of issues. I went to the all candidates meeting in Elmville, wasn't asked any questions. I did get my first write-up in the Springwater News. He noted that Tony Georges wore a poppy and nobody else did. That was the last time I think Michael said something good about me. And the election evening, the results were, or the polling station was the former fire hall in Vespra, on Sunnydale Road in Center Vespra. And Paula King, I don't know if you know Paula King or knew who Paula King was, your worship, you may remember her from Ant Mills. She received the Order of Canada, I believe, or Order of Ontario for her work with the Women's Crisis Center and Shelter in Barrie. She was the returning officer at the polling station. And she allowed both the other candidate and myself to stand inside. And when the time came for the vote to be tallied, she got off the phone, and there was a big old machine in there, looked like a fax machine, and she hit the button, it spit out a little tag, she ripped it off, looked at it, handed it to me and said, "You win." So that was the end of that election. The inaugural for that group was really interesting. We didn't have a place to meet. There was no township administration center with a large enough place. So we used the County of Simcoe's county council chambers. And all the past members of council were invited to come up and speak. And I learned a lot that night from them and their wisdom. I want to just try and quote a couple of things that were said. Dan McLean made a statement. He said, and I'm sure Dan can correct this if I don't get it right exactly, but he said, if you look after somebody else's ward, you won't have to look after your own. And I took from that, you know, we need to work together as a council and respect each other's challenges. And then Harold Parker, who, as many of you recall, is a very eloquent speaker and a mentor of mine for many years. When he spoke, he said these words. He said, equally educated minds rarely differ. So he said, try and find a way to work with your colleagues to make sure that you're getting the information at the same time and all the same information, and it'll help you on your journey. So those were words that I came to live by and guided me well moving forward. The first meeting of Springwater Township Council in 2001, our meeting room was 12 foot by 20 feet. That's where we held general committee and planning, and the public would come in with all of us and staff and sit in that space. It was really tight quarters. When I walked into the very first meeting, which is a daytime meeting, and sat down, I sat next to the Deputy Mayor, John Brown. And he said to me, "Don't get comfortable, you'll be the last Ward 4 councillor." He said, "This amalgamation thing with the province is never going to stop, and we won't last this term." Him and many others that went through amalgamation felt that way. I think you heard recent comments from a former member of Vespra Council that those kind of approaches by the province were inevitable. And John felt that way, yet here we are, and there's still a Ward 4 councillor, but I understand why they felt the way they felt. I wanted to talk about the training that I received and Mayor Helen Coots' leadership. I was really fortunate, and this is something that I've talked to other members of council about. At the table for me, there was the former reeve of Vesper Township, former Simcoe County Warden, and now Springwater Mayor Helen Coots. So she had all that knowledge. She was just warden the year before. To my right was John Brown, the former reeve and councillor and deputy mayor of Elmville, and former warden of Simcoe County as well. He had all of that experience. The CAO, his name was Julian Toffs, former CAO of Vesper Township, and the clerk Eleanor Rath, former clerk of Floss Township. So there wasn't a question you couldn't ask that somebody in that room wouldn't know the answer to. Immediately, we had all of that information readily available to us. We took a counselor training course called Counselor 101. AMO provided the documents, but it was delivered by staff. And in it, it had this illustration and scenario of the pothole counselor, and if you called staff and asked them to come and fix a pothole in your area, as opposed to going through the proper channels of working that through at a council meeting and allowing staff to work it through in their time, how much extra at the end of the day that cost the corporation. Mayor Coots was also a farmer. She was also a school teacher, and she continued to teach throughout her time. I didn't really appreciate it much at the time, but I sure appreciated it after. I learned a lot from her. She shared a lot of wisdom, and she was very efficient. She would constantly talk about how she could get more done by waiting an hour or a day to drive from the township, or drive from her house to the township, or have a staff member drive to her house. Back then, there were no computers, so everything had to be delivered and signed personally. And so she was always looking for those efficiencies. I was appointed to the RVH board, the NVCA, and the Heritage Committee. I don't know who's on the Heritage Committee currently. Very good. So I received kind of a, I don't know, odd reception, but that was one of the most fruitful and interesting group of peoples I'd ever had a chance to work with. There was two people on there of note: Marlene Hilton Moore, the artist, and Ruth Byers. Ruth was the wife of the former Vespra fire chief. And Ruth would tell us how fires were responded to back in the day. You would call in for a fire to Ruth's house, and she would answer the phone. And while she was at the kitchen table, she would yell to her husband, who would then head out to the fire hall, and then she would sit and go through the numbers and phone all the firefighters herself. So just a very interesting group and really good work. We were supported by Eleanor Rath, who was the clerk, and she was the driving force and true author behind the facade guidelines for Elmville. I don't know if you've seen that document or if that's still around, but fantastic work. On a day-to-day response, Mayor Coots rarely contacted us. We had very little contact other than I would say once a year phone call. There was no email at the time. We would just meet in meetings, and that was the communication that we had at the time. But what was really interesting was this 1 or 2 meeting a week thing that I was pitched. That turned into meetings that would run from that would run from 8 in the morning till late in the evening. Now, we might be general committee, planning and council, or special meeting or budget or something, but we would meet sometimes all day. And there were meetings, and staff had to be there to support all those meetings. There were many times that we ran into this procedural bylaw issue where we would have to suspend them to pass a motion to extend, not the normal motion to extend, the motion to extend into the next day. So we would meet past midnight. It would be a new day. So we would have to create a new meeting with a new date for the following day. We met sometimes till 1 and 2 in the morning, which obviously was ridiculous and eventually ended, but that's what council was faced with at the time. So at that time, I just wanted to speak briefly about what the staff complement looked like with the amalgamated council and staff. So we had staff from all the different municipalities. Not many new staff. So there were a lot of pre-existing issues in municipalities that carried over expertise in some areas, not in others. But our CAO at the time, as I said, Julian Tufts, he didn't have a computer, didn't know how to use one in the year 2001, 2, and that became a real challenge. The burden of all of the communication, all of that technology, and responding to the important documentation of the township fell on the shoulders of the clerk, Eleanor Rath. And she really was doing the lion's share of the work in the administration office. Part of that council term, we took on the responsibility of consolidating the official plans of 5 municipalities. So we had the official plan of Elmvale, Floss, and Vespra, but we also had pieces of Tay and Tiny. And so we had to work through that. We had a part-time consultant. We did not have a planner on staff. There was no planning department in Springwater Township at the time. So imagine the challenges that you see now, and we could see those emerging in municipalities around us, and no planning department. So our planning consultant would sit with us, as they said, till late hours in the night, putting together every single bylaw that you see now. We hand work through those hand by hand to put together what would be an appropriate conclusion. Same as the zoning bylaws. So there were setbacks that would preclude the size of a building in one municipality, and there were provisions that would preclude the height of a building in another, but not the same in both. So every one of those things had to be worked through. Looking back on it, it was an absolutely ridiculous thought that the working council could have done that. But we did undertake to do it. And I don't know if anybody's ever really gone back and judged the work that was done, but it was considerable. And I would say that saved probably a tremendous amount of money, but I would say that at the expense of many people's livelihoods, careers, and honestly, I would say that Eleanor Rath probably deserves a plaque in her name somewhere for the amount of work that she did in establishing and creating Springwater Township. I didn't really understand it or appreciate it at the time, but looking back, certainly was absolutely incredible. So another effect I wanted to talk about from the amalgamation was that Springwater Township received a large sum of money for lands that were taken away in the annexation. That money, I think it was around $5 million, was used to offset the taxes for to reduce taxes in Springwater Township. So we had, I think, in our first several years, 0% tax increases. Going into so 2000, 2001, 2002, 0% tax increase. The money ran out. It's an election year. Mayor Coutts wasn't running. John Brown stepped up to announce his bid for mayor. And at that time, we were dealing with the budget. Staff came in with the necessary, not the projected, the necessary tax increase after 5 years of 0% tax increase with COLA and the cost of utilities and upgrades that we've been offsetting. Staff came in with a recommendation of 24% tax increase in an election year. We ended up passing an 18% tax increase that year. Deputy Mayor Brown stepped up, ran for mayor, and I stepped up, ran for deputy mayor. And 4 of us ran again. 3 new members were elected, and we stuck together. We went out to the public and we had conversations. We talked about the necessity. We talked about why it happened, and John Brown was a tremendous leader in that regard. He was a hockey player and played team sports, and he played politics like a sport. And he made sure that we all stuck to the message, and we all got acclaimed in that 18% tax increase year, all but one, the ward councillor in Midhurst. And so that was a interesting learning experience for me, certainly, to have having gone through, a very small election and then next to be acclaimed. Pause for a second, sorry. So the agendas for those meetings back then, as I say, were all paper, and every one of them had to be delivered to the members of council. So you would see this bundle of paper outside your door a few days before each meeting, and staff would be responsible for delivering all of that every time. If there was budget, there would be a binder. If there were special meetings, there would be another binder, and sometimes you would have a stack of paper like this to carry back and forth for the meetings. So all the resolutions were put out on the desk. All the resolutions were signed and seconded. Everybody had a copy of them. There was a lot of trees killed, let's put it that way, back in the day, to accommodate council. Eleanor Rath again introduced the first computer for council option, and I was the guinea pig that started that trend. So if you hate your computer, it's probably somewhere between Eleanor and I that happened. It was a real challenge for council once we did go that route. So there was a combination of paper and computer for a very long time. Just to give you an example of closed session, our closed session was similar at the call of the chair and council, but there was no minutes, there was no motions, and there was no minutes or motions coming out of council. There was no record of closed session whatsoever. So it was just go into closed session, speaking in the privacy of chambers, and whatever came out of that was held with the mayor and council and staff to deal with. So quite a difference. The other thing I just wanted to speak about in terms of Mayor Coutts' leadership, she had a very strong opinion about a division between the board of directors as council and staff. And so she provided us with examples of different scenarios that she'd seen in her role as warden, how different councils were handling that. Her very strong opinion was that there was this one employee scenario. Council as the board of directors had one employee, the CAO. And if we had issue with anything else or any other department or any other individual, we spoke to either council about it or council and the CAO. So if you needed to reach out to staff, there was none of that allowed. You had to go through the CAO. If you did, she would call you up on the carpet in a meeting, not in public, but certainly in front of council, and ask you why you thought you were more important than everybody else and that you needed to take up the resources and time of the public to go and talk to a member of staff. And she went further to say on many occasions, staff don't want to be your friend. They don't want to have a relationship with you. It compromises their role as they come forward to try and make presentation. There's going to be a bias on them that members of council will think you have a special relationship. And so if you see a member of staff in a grocery store with their family and you're there with your family, don't stop and talk. Say hello, keep moving. And she reinforced that quite often. So that wasn't always the style that I saw throughout municipalities, but it was certainly Mayor Coots's position, and she held that firmly. With that, we had this other challenging issue of where we would go in terms of the township's longevity. There was always because this was an amalgamation council and because we were post amalgamation, and there was this understanding that amalgamation wouldn't end. A lot of our decisions were challenged, including, do we build an administration center? That decision got made for us later on. But at the time, there was certainly a lot of talk about, should we take that step on our own? Is there going to be another amalgamation? Should we build the ball diamond? Should we build an arena? Should we do anything, because these things were inevitable. So it really did challenge the council. So there were always discussions and pressures about boundary changes and other municipalities, issues and how to deal with those. Mostly those were dealt with at the county, but there were local pressures and discussions that took place. I understand the sensitivities. I'm not here and not able to speak to any of those in particular because they were handled mostly in closed session. And I am bound by, as you are, bound by an oath of office to confidentiality. And that doesn't end at your term of council. It lasts your entire life. So I'm not able to speak to those specifically, but what I can say is that we as council, we're always perplexed by this message of working together because with our neighbors, because the township of Springwater is a member of Simcoe County, and we work with 16 other municipalities really well in a cooperative. So we were always kind of curious why that was a criticism of us, considering some municipalities don't participate in the county of Simcoe, even though they're in it, because that is a good place for things to work out. And I think the message that Springwater Township works well with their neighbors, back then we would quite often refer to the fact that we are active members of the county. In fact, our Mayor Helen Coots had been a warden of the county, and currently your mayor is a deputy warden of the county. I think that demonstrates a lot that members of the cooperative see the leadership of this municipality as an active partner participating in the issues and relationships with the neighbors. So we were always perplexed by that kind of conversation. The other issue that was perplexing about that was that the history of Vesper Township tells a really different story. Vesper Township used to go down to Lake Simcoe waterfront. That was Vesper Township. The cenotaph on Barry's waterfront has the Vesper Boys in it. That was representatives of our community that were in the war, and that was where our cenotaph was. The city courthouse was Simcoe County Council chambers, and year after year, or time after time, 13 annexations later, this municipality was so generous and at the table and participating that it has made itself extinct, and there is no more Vesper Township. So that was a perplexing conversation as well. And the other very strong message that Springwater Township, through the mayor at the time, was quick to always say was that we are an extremely responsive municipality and we handle growth well, and we've followed the growth projections to the best of our ability. And so anytime there was anything put forward by the province as an initiative that we needed to handle in terms of growth, we were always very responsive and participated. Even today, I haven't watched a council meeting. I apologize. I haven't watched many of your meetings, but I did tune into the last few. And I mean, from my perspective, what I saw was 7 members of council receive a delegation from this very spot for a very progressive development. And I saw 7 members of council vote in favor of moving forward, which to me says you're respecting the need for housing, you're respecting the Ford government's initiative to move forward. So I saw good leadership. And I think we did that in the past. I think, our position was Springwater rocks. We're doing a great job. And, if there are things the province needs us to do to proactively move forward, give us the tools to do it. I think one of the important things that I'm sure members of council are aware of, but to restate, was a challenge for us. Is part of the beginning of the growth plan back in the 90s, the province asked us to define our settlement boundaries. And what they asked us to do was to take a realistic projection on where that we see growth going in those small communities and trying to find the lines around them to give the province a better indication of what the growth numbers would look like. And so not just in Springwater, but throughout Simcoe County and most of the province, that's what was done. So Springwater Township, in speaking to every member of council about this decision, because they were around that I could ask them at the time, they were given guidelines such as, the community moving to the edge of a rail line or a major highway, or moving to a boundary or expanding in those kind of ways, but also based on history and growth projections. So in every case in Springwater Township, Elmville was this big and it moved like this. Minising was this big and it moved like this. Ant Mills like this and like this. Hillsdale like this and this. Midhurst went like this. So I said I'd never seen anything like it. When the province started doing their growth outreach, they did one at the old racetrack in Barrie. Province came in, put up their growth projections, and then they did another one at the Simcoe County Museum. And in every case, Bruce Singbush, I believe, was the planner for the province's name. He said, in every case, the number one question we got, and the growth areas were purple. He said, every case, the number one question we got is, what's that purple blob above Barrie? And that was the Midhurst secondary plan. So what happened was council, in their wisdom, decided that in Midhurst, they would prefer to create a study area. And they wanted to look at a broader growth situation for Midhurst. So instead of just studying a small area, they went like this. What happened was when it went to the county stamped it as settlement boundary. When it went to the province stamped it settlement boundary. You could have asked anybody for 10 years if that was a growth area in Midhurst. Even the people who owned the land there didn't believe that was a growth area. But in the provincial policy and review, it was in fact the settlement boundary. So that's the 1998 decision that defined where we were going with the Midhurst area. And so when sophisticated developers came forward, they saw the possibility and the initiative and the strategy and the need for housing and capitalized on it. So that's how that happened. And to I guess ratify that position from the province, there was a later ministerial order that said, in fact, that is the Midhurst plan, and away it went. I think around 2011, 13, somewhere there, post when I was involved. So a couple of other just notes. Do council know the history of this furniture? Anybody know the story on this?
I believe it's from the college.
That's right.
And it was
yeah.
a giant S at one point.
It was actually, this was the original Georgian College boardroom table. It was a big oval with one gate to get into the middle, and staff would go in and present in the middle of it. So this was the original Georgian College. So during our conversations to try and save the save the Center Vesper Fire Hall, meeting with Georgian College and their need for a fire school, we found this great marriage of Georgian College moving there. Through that time, there was future conversations. Through that time, we started talking about administration center, and the past president of Georgian College said, "Hey, if you happen to need some tables, we have this stuff up in storage. You should come and have a look at it." So myself and staff went and looked. This is what it was, covered in dust, up in storage. Turns out it was built by a guy in Elmville. So we made it work. It was a circle, but we, twisted it around, and so here it is. Another interesting fact is these pictures on the wall, they hung in Elmville. Those pictures are actually former Floss, Elmville, and Vespra wardens of the county. Those aren't mayors. The mayors hung on another wall. So I don't know how they ended up there, and I don't know where the pictures of the mayors went, but these were all wardens of Simcoe County that represented the corporations back in the day. So yeah, somewhere through the move, that all changed and happened. I don't know where I'm at in terms of time, but I'm happy to answer questions if that.
Perfect. Before we do actually move to questions, I'll just have a mover and seconder to the presentation on the floor, and then we can turn to questions. If Councillor Moore and Councillor Alexander, that the presentation from Tony Georges regarding the history of the township of Springwater be received. And I can open it up to the floor. So the pictures are actually downstairs in the hallway now. So
Are they
we keep
okay?
the past wardens of Simcoe County on, and the last mayor on this
Oh,
wall
very
here, and
good.
everybody else is downstairs in the
Okay.
old bowling alley, as we call it.
Okay. Very good.
Good. All right, council, at this time I can open the floor up for questions. And I will wait for Councillor Fisher before we. Oh, my apologies, Councillor. I didn't see your hand. My apologies. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin, and thank you, Mr. Georges, for the presentation. It was quite interesting. A lot of stuff I didn't know. So a couple questions. One, when we're looking at the current situation that we're in with Barrie, what do you see that the role of the county can help us so we don't end up in a situation where they're just coming in and taking what they want from us and we're fighting them on their own, considering we are, am I not allowed to ask this question?
Councillor Alexander, I do apologize. During the discussion, when we did approve this presentation, there was some information that was provided about the city of Barrie, but the resolution that is before council, the reason that we are sitting here is that this is to be a history lesson We are not to be seeking guidance from the consultant. And I will turn to the clerk for confirmation.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. Yes, correct. The motion that was passed that had the effect of having this meeting spoke specifically to the history of the township. Should council wish to see anything further, further direction would be required from council.
Deputy Cabral?
Thank you. I just would ask for indulgence on that until Councillor Fisher gets back in order for us to proceed. But I do have a couple of questions with respect to the amalgamation piece. In particular, the monies that were paid when that happened. And I also was quite interested in knowing how the taxation would have resolved itself, with some parts going here, some parts going there, how that was taken care of. How the taxation affected the people that were amalgamated outside of the New Springwater, and what happened to the folks that were left in Floss Township moving forward, and who was it who gave the money? I guess that's part and partial to where I would like to see what happened back then. And I also know that there was another I guess annexation with respect to Innisfil, which I don't know whether that was like ours on that particular piece. Was it driven by the province, or was that amalgamation came from somewhere else? So could you elaborate on that a bit, Mr. Gurgis? Because I'd be very interested, because I think in my mind, we're looking at that in particular as a cornerstone of the historical aspect that I was hoping that you might be able to bring light to.
Mr. Churches?
Yes, your worship, certainly through you, without getting into any detail that is current and relevant and direction, understanding that. The money, as I understand it, came primarily from Barrie, but there was negotiations throughout the region on how benefiting municipalities and their taxation would be calculated, and that was worked through. This was primarily done at the county level with representatives there, and it was a provincial initiative. And so I believe county council at that time was either 54 or 48 members. We were the largest, probably still are, Simcoe County Council, the largest municipal council in Ontario. We're second to the city of Toronto. Now the city of Toronto is smaller than County of Simcoe. A lot of those big picture decisions were done at the county level, as I said. So most of that was again done in closed session at the county level, because there was negotiations that did affect obviously landowners, and most of this probably is and will be as well. I did want to share one other perspective, I guess, just in terms of sort of the big picture piece in how things, and it was an example that was brought up so many times in the past that I think it's worth bringing up again. The mayor of Alliston in 1966 became warden of the county, a gentleman by the name of the Honorable George McKeag. And George later went on to become a provincial member of parliament, and he worked in many different roles and capacities. But because he understood the county and he understood the opportunities and the way things worked, while he was in the role of Minister of Transportation, he was able to be the one who negotiated the Honda plant coming to Alliston. And there was a lot of controversy about why Alliston. His point was, why not? And it's Simcoe County and everybody will benefit. That argument became very territorial about it should be, in the large urban center, and it should be here and it should be there. Fact is, many people from throughout Simcoe County work there, and there's 700, back in the day with the original plant, 711 spin-off businesses from Honda. So you can imagine now with the engine plant and with the new opportunity, the kind of opportunities it means for, for every municipality here. So when you're talking about providing big picture strategies, I think, with the mayor and deputy mayor sitting at the county and our mayor being deputy warden, tremendous opportunity abound for us to be front and center. And so that was always our perspective, was trying to stay, involved and engaged with the neighbors, and who knows where to lead. George McCaig, many years later, it should be touted with the, with the fact that he was able to bring Honda to Simcoe County. So I know that didn't answer your question specifically, but
In one
Start microphone, please. Thank you.
did in one sense, Mr. Gurgis, because it did allude to the fact that Simcoe County as a whole per se with the partner municipalities does serve, well, like their slogan says, a greater purpose, for the greater good. But my other question would also be with respect to county at that particular time. Was Barrie a part of county at that time, or were they a tier one at that time themselves? Because that would have had a role to play, I think, in that whole amalgamation piece in the creation of Springwater Township.
no, they weren't. It was the 1950s when Barrie seceded from the county. But again, I mean, such a crucial piece. For me as a resident, you are the seven of you are champions to try and provide and bring big picture planning and opportunity to us as residents, and being part of the county is a crucial part of that. So, and your leadership there, both of you is crucial.
Turn to council for further questions. Councillor Moore?
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. Mr. George, it's just curious, your time when the annexations happened, so 13 annexations later, how did the county feel about that? Or how did they participate? Or how did you get, I have two questions actually. So how did you get folks on board? And then secondly, the admin center. That's a massive project. Back in the day, it would have cost an enormous amount of money. Can you just walk us through this project too? We're working on a community center and a fire hall and, big projects and sort of how this became so successful.
Mr. Georges?
Certainly, through your worship. The first question was that Barrie was part of the county for a lot of those restructurings. And I think there was tremendous support. The Mayor Barrie was the warden of county in 1952. I think it was 52, but certainly, many times throughout our history. And they were able to make good arguments, I think, to say, look, as a region, this will benefit everybody, and everybody supported that. To the point where, as I say, Vesper Township made themselves extinct from supporting, the city of Barrie. So I think that, it was probably very challenging, but it was something where I can go back to what Harold Parker said. Equally educated minds rarely differ. So if everybody's getting the information at the same time and they're getting equal information, and people are playing in a scenario like the county of Simcoe where the rules when you go in and everybody is equal, there's opportunity for big picture regional situations. I hate to use the word region, but Honda and George McCaig, that story, that is a big picture regional situation. In terms of your second question, it was a very odd situation where the county of Simcoe did a review of their own space. So they had so many employees working outside in different parts of the county that needed to be brought in-house. They needed more space. So paramedic services headquarters was cramped, and different departments were running out of room. So the report came forward that they needed to first deal with tenants and give them the boot. So Warden Tony Georges had to write a letter to Mayor Tony Georges to say, time to go. So we received that letter on behalf of the county, and we negotiated an extension best we could, but we had to address the new administration center. And we had this piece of land. We debated on how to deal with it best, where the best location would be out on the highway and away from the tracks and all of those scenarios. And then we went into the process. So I don't know whether that's known or not, but this was one of the only government projects that I know that was built both on time and on budget. And so we had a tremendous team. Brad Sokatch, I think you're still all familiar with Brad, was chair of the committee. And I was reminded of some really important words back then by one of our good friends in the community, Norm Godfrey. Norm said to me and reminded me of these words: when you go into a project, take the words while you're at it out of your vocabulary. And so I did. I wrote that on the chalkboard at the very first meeting of the committee. And I never sat in many of the committee meetings, but I can tell you that every time I went back, they all laughed and said, you would not believe how many times we said, while we're at it, we should just add, one more thing. And I think as a result of that, the project came in very efficiently. I think we were shooting for LEED silver. We achieved LEED's platinum on the building, which I think is still quite commendable, and was affordable. But thank goodness we did it. I mean, you look at what other municipalities are looking at now. I think our budget here was 6 or 7 million. Other municipalities smaller than us are looking at administration centers in the 20+ million range. However, happen to be familiar with the ESSA Township situation. My father was the chief building official in ESSA. Just remembering that our fire chief was a tenant of my dad. He's a young man. I can remember him when I was a kid. We're both probably the same age, but he moved in very young to one of my dad's apartments. But my dad was tasked with building the administration center in ESSA and built that for $400,000. So back in the day, that was a lot of money, but served that municipality well. So there was a time to move forward on infrastructure. It never gets cheaper. If you need it, do it. That was our philosophy back then.
Deputy Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. I'm going to step back to the annexation piece there. I think that's relative and important. I think part and partial to hearing some of the background, Mr. Georges, was in my mind specific to that piece. And I know now things have changed. It's an information age. Folks are out there, they have access to all kinds of information. And there's an enormous amount of public outreach and public consultation. And I'm just wondering back then, what kind of public consultation was in place prior to that amalgamation taking place? Because it sounds to me now that maybe it started with the county. But what kind of public consultation, like the folks that are going to be impacted by this, how were they, what kind of input did they have? Because up to this point in time, it doesn't strike me that there was a whole lot back then, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot sometimes going forward.
Mr. Georges?
Through your worship, I don't know if is Don Bell still at the county?
Dinger comes out of my mouth every
Yeah.
time I say it, but no, he's not our page anymore. He has since retired from that position.
Okay. So again, tremendous resource. So I was the warden that appointed Don Bell to the county. Don Bell was chair of the amalgamation. He told me that he was run out of more buildings and scared for his life at more meetings than you could possibly imagine. He said, you've never seen anything like it. We would go to communities and they were talking about getting rid of names like Ottawa and, former municipal names, including his own, Floss. And people were extremely passionate about those things and didn't want to see those kind of change and those communities disappear. And so, you know, he said it was absolutely horrible. He'd never do it again, and regretted his choice to take on the role. And you know, you know, he almost talked quietly about it because he didn't want anybody to bring it up again. It was a very challenging time, and I do remember seeing articles in the newspapers about the outcry and people's opposition to it.
Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Gurgis. One more question. Part of your historical background with Springwater Township being the warden as well. I understand you had some involvement with the Innisfil annexation. Is that part and partial to when you had your tenure here at Springwater Township as well?
Mr. Churches?
Yes, through you, your worship. The Innisfil Barrie situation was going on and on. There was a provincial facilitator appointed and was not able to reach a conclusion after a very lengthy, bitter, drawn-out situation. Alan Wells, I think, was the gentleman's name at the time. And I'm just trying to walk through that in my mind to see what is, you know, appropriate to say. But long story short, I was asked as warden of the county to facilitate that situation between the city and Innisfil. And you know, again, the county of Simcoe is a tremendous tool that all municipalities in the geography should be working with and through to find ways and means to do that. When the province was frustrated with the provincial facilitation process, they reached out to the county to find a method to work through that situation. So I would say we were extremely successful in terms of the fact that the two municipalities did come together in the end at that point and find a resolution.
Deputy Cabral?
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. I'm going to step back to Councillor Alexander's comment earlier on, and if I could be so bold as to ask Councillor Alexander to kind of provide something, because then the clerk was indicating there was a way for us to move forward there. I'm just kind of wondering, and in addition to that, Councillor Fisher was not present at the table. So I'm very interested in hearing more about what Mr. Gurgis might be able to share with us with respect to his involvement, not only with Springwater Township when the annexation took place there and it was formulated, but also the background that he may very well have and possess that may be of some assistance to us with respect to the Innisfil Barrie annexation that occurred. So just wondering how we might be able to proceed with that.
Thank you. The clerk did provide advice, and I do believe there's been communication between staff and Mr. Gurgis as to the appropriateness of that conversation. But if it is the will of council to proceed in that direction, it would simply be by resolution of this council. The point of that is a agenda went out. The agenda went out to the public. This was to be an information session about a history lesson, and nowhere in that resolution did it suggest that there would be discussions about the city of Barrie. If this council chooses to have discussions or receive advice about negotiations with the city of the Barrie, I believe it's appropriate that we provide notice to our residents so they can be involved and have input in that as well. But if the discussion is to move that way, it would just be by resolution of this council. Deputy?
Yeah, Mayor Coughlin, I would be very interested in hearing what Mr. Gurgis might be able to provide to this council in the way of background information and insight into how this whole process occurred, not only with Springwater Township's amalgamation, but also with the annexations that have taken place over the last little while. his familiarity with the facilitator process. All of those things, I think, are intrinsic to what this council and other councils may vary. And in addition to that, the information that and experience Mr. Gurgis has with Simcoe County Council. And I'm not suggesting that we do it now. What I'm asking, I think, is an opportunity to explore those particular areas at another meeting at another time, not at today. I think you're 100% right. The public should be made aware of exactly what our council is doing and what information council might be seeking from Mr. Gurgis through his experience in the background. The experience that he has in that particular area, I don't think could be demonstrated by anyone else. And don't know how to do that, but maybe a resolution that we have at least one more section with Mr. Gurgis specific to those types of questions that he might be able to offer some insight.
And I do hear the clerk typing away here, so I'll just patient. Counselor Moore and then Counselor Fisher.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Mr. Gurgis, when you've talked about the first sort of term, was it your intention then to have another meeting to continue on with, you've got 10 years plus of experience, plus 4 years at Rogers Communications. I'd like to hear about media training or, some of maybe those interviews that happened with local politicians and your time as the electoral sort of support during the elections also on television. And I mean, I saw you there myself during the elections as an advisor. So was it your intention then to continue to do that timeline? It is, considering it is going to take probably several meetings.
Mr. Gurgis?
Through you, your worship, yes, I certainly, I think I explained to you the conversation and how we came to this, meeting. In my mind, I guess I was thinking that, that term of council and Mayor Helen Coots, leadership and the building blocks and the amalgamation council and those things. There was a lot to consider within that. And in fairness, it was a very different Springwater Township when we moved into the next term under Mayor John Brown. There was a whole bunch of new challenges. A lot of the same challenges came up again, and we dealt with them very differently under Mayor Brown's leadership. So, including staffing issues and how we responded to things. So, I think there is, I think there is definitely more information to share. Again, things changed dramatically when the mayor of Springwater Township became the warden of Simcoe County and the challenges that brought with it as well. So yeah, there's definitely a lot to talk through on those points. On the media side, I'm not sure that would necessarily benefit. I mean, there's some interesting stories for certain. And some interesting things were said by politicians throughout the region that were interested in Springwater Township and its evolution. Mostly they were shocked by somebody could get elected and an 18% tax increase many times, but I would share that story often. So yeah, there's definitely, I think, a lot that can be helpful to the seven of you as you move forward to know some of those foundational positions that were dealt with by council.
I did say that I would go to Counselor Fisher and then Thompson and Garwood.
All right. Just for some clarity, I believe there was in the past you'd saved the Elmvale High School. You had something to do with that. I was wondering if you'd share that story with us.
Well, listen, there was a lot of people that worked really hard to make sure that Elmvale's high school didn't leave, but I don't think people really understand how how far into the closing of that school the decision was, and we were able to pull that out of the fire. So a lot of the things that don't make great headlines are the things that didn't happen as a result. But we were extremely fortunate for Elmville's high school not to close. That was I think a foregone conclusion in the majority of the decision makers' minds. That school was closing. So I'll just tell you, that the county again played a major role in saving Elmville's high school. And the capacity and relationships we had there. So much can be done when you're working with a larger collective and bringing those issues forward. Yeah, just to give you an example of where that was at, I think the school board started an accommodation review process. Is everybody familiar with that? The accommodation review process? Yeah. Okay. So they started an accommodation review process in about 2007. And we were hearing very clearly that that was a push to close 2 or 3 schools in Simcoe County, one of them being Elmville. And so that became more and more clear as we went through the process. So we collectively, as Springwater, met with Clearview and Wasaga Beach, and we agreed to support Stayner, Elmville, and a new school in Wasaga Beach. We agreed on that. 3 councils. When it came to the accommodation review meeting, I got a call the night before from the mayor of Wasaga Beach and said, look, I've been told there's no way we're getting a school in Wasaga Beach unless Elmville closes. I'm going to the meeting tomorrow night to support closing Elmville. So that's what happened. The town of Wasaga Beach went with all their support and supported closing Elmville's high school. So now we had Clearview protecting theirs, Springwater protecting Elmville, and Wasaga Beach saying, we're the perfect spot for the central mega school, close them both. Made a lot of sense to a lot of people. And so that was a lot of momentum. Of course, our trustee, Peter Beacock, is he still a trustee? No. Phenomenal. That guy deserves a medal for the work he did back in the day to help save this high school as well. And he and I worked really closely together. And again, the Diane Furman, I believe her name was the chair of the school board at the time. She became very interested in the county of Simcoe strategy to help her understand that Simcoe County was the lowest funded per capita for education municipality in Ontario. So we were seen as the haves, if you will, prosperous, lots of growth, lots of taxation, school board funding, very low, which was kind of odd that they would not reward you differently that way. So she joined forces with us to try and keep all the schools open and bring more education opportunity here. I also, through the Association of Municipalities, partnered with Doug Raycraft, who was the president of AMO at the time, a former provincial member of parliament, and Cam Jackson, another provincial member, mayor of a large municipality. 4 or 5 of us large municipal leaders joined in an alliance to ensure that there would be no schools closing in Ontario. And we made lots of headlines, met with the minister, who was at that time Kathleen Wynne, Minister of Education, and they took notice. So we got a lot of traction, and Elmville's high school was now front and center on the provincial scene. So that was another key piece that really helped the high school, but again, through the county of Simcoe. So yeah, no, thank you for the question. I was always very passionate about that. And as the mayor, I did sit on the Elmville school, save the school, board and put a lot of time and effort into making sure that didn't happen. Thank you.
Counselor Thompson, and then I do see that CEO Schmidt.
Through the chair to Mr. Georges, thanks for coming tonight, Mr. Georges. My big concern here is that the original motion started with a big deception. This was supposed to be about a history lesson, and then the map showed up and we started talking about the boundary stuff. And I mean, I appreciate you coming. I mean, you've only come because we've asked you to come, but maybe I'm not educated enough. But personally, I haven't found the history lesson very valuable. It's more like a fireside chat or a coffee chat. I'm really concerned about us going to the boundary discussion, as Deputy Mayor Cabral has alluded to. And I guess my question to you is that, have you already had a discussion with Deputy Mayor Cabral about the boundary discussion and your role that you would play in it and the advice that you would give to us?
Through your worship, I appreciate your concern. I had never seen the map you referred to before you, I suppose before you saw it in the meeting that I watched later. So no, there's been no direct, I've talked to every member of council, reached out to everybody and individually had conversations. There's no strategy that I can't share any strategy individually with you that I or experience that I had that is a closed session. Certain things are now open session that have happened or not happened, but in most cases have not. So they're still closed session. So I can't share those with you or anybody else if we're not in closed session. So generally I've had conversations with everybody.
CEO Schmidt.
Thank you, Mayor Coggan. So just wanted to advise council that as you consider your next steps with Mr. Georges, just to remind you that as Mr. Georges mentioned and just previously reiterated, some of the topics that are being requested of him, you need to consider the format moving forward as to how those discussions would take place. So I'll leave it at that.
Counselor Garwood.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin, and thank you, Mr. Georges, for being here. It's nice to meet you. I'm sure you know where my opinion sits on this discussion. I've been very vocal around my opposition to having this meeting in general, spending taxpayer dollars where I don't believe they need to be spent. I do not see the need for further discussions. While I can respect the information that is provided today, when this was brought forward to council, there was no indication that this was going to be multiple discussions. I do not believe we need to spend any more taxpayer dollars on these ongoing history lessons. And I'm also confused as to why we are setting artificial timelines and terms in this discussion. We sit at this table every other week for 4, 5, sometimes 6 hours. We've only been here for an hour and 13 minutes. Let's keep going. If the information is being requested, why would we spend more money to have Mr. Georges go away? I assume the information is available and ready to go, seeing as it is your history and your experience. Then provide it. I'm not sure why we are looking at additional information around media training or backgrounds, etc. That was not in the original motion. So again, I will not support further discussions. I didn't support them initially. I said I would be here to learn and listen because that is our job. I respect you for being here today, but I will not support this moving forward.
Deputy Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. You're 100% right. There are certain things that are not going to be permitted to be said in open session. And that's the unfortunate part about something that had history in it. However, I guess what I'm really looking for is I'm very eager, one, to get the report from staff. I've been very interested in what's been going on in Oro-Medonte and the process that they've been following. I think that Mr. Georges is in a unique position to provide us with some resource information. And I'm not suggesting that we need to set a date today because I think this might play into when the staff report comes forward, maybe having a meeting after that. But unfortunately, the nature of this whole thing, and you can reflect on the other municipality, there will be some closed session meetings with respect to some of the dialogue and some of the conversation that's going to take place. So I guess what I'm trying to say is this has been very, very narrow focus on history. However, we have someone who was there for the amalgamation of Springwater, was there for the annexation of Innisfil, and played what I would consider a very integral role in that entire process, and has some background information that I think this council might find useful. So what I'm really looking for is an opportunity to be able to reach back out to Mr. Gurgis at a later date after council gets our report from staff. And then at some point in time, this council is going to have to sit down and go over it. And I have to disagree with Mr. Garwood, because the more information I can get going forward, the more informed a decision I'm going to be able to make. So if somebody can just provide 1% or one little answer to me with respect to where this township should be going, then I want to hear what that individual has to say. I want to hear what our staff have to say. I want to hear what Oro Medonte has to say. And that's the only way that this council can move forward. And I'd also like to hear what the county has to say, because county played a huge role in what's gone on in the past. And we need to reflect on what's already happened before we can step into tomorrow. And right now, at this stage of the game, I still think Springwater Township has an opportunity to develop and grow and be in a partnership with other municipalities to address everyone's concerns in a respectful manner. That's all that we want to do. So I guess what I'm saying is, I don't want to say, let's have another meeting right now. And that's the resolution I would put forward. What I would like to be able to do, and hopefully council will agree with me, even Councillor Garwood, any information is good information. You can filter out the stuff that you don't like or that you don't want. But to blindly sit here and say we don't want to speak to this individual or another individual, or get a report from staff and still expect to be able to go and negotiate anything, that's about as far from the truth as anything could be. So all I'm asking for here is to be able to still retain Mr. Gurgis, so that if council decides down the road that we would like to have a session where Mr. Gurgis can come in and actually speak to us about the issue at hand that we're facing with boundary adjustments, annexation, whatever you want to call it, I think that still would be valuable. So that's kind of what I'm looking for, not a specific date. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do have 4 members of council who have indicated the opportunity to speak. Mr. George, if you could repeat for me the advice that Harold Parker gave you years ago.
Equally educated minds rarely differ.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for that. And I absolutely do value my very first term. I was campaigning and ended up in a rainstorm in Minising, and decided that, you know what, I'll take the long driveway. And Harold had reached out, and out of respect, I left my cell phone in the vehicle, because I know that some people take offense to when it's going off and you're turning it. So I learned manners and I left it in there. However, that conversation ended up being 4.5 hours.
Right.
And my husband was quite concerned as to where I was and why I wasn't answering my phone.
Time well used.
I do agree that equal information, but I would challenge the idea that information needs to come from one source. Because while I do appreciate the information you gave us tonight about the Elmvale High School, many hours spent with George Allen, learning about what that community has gone through.
Absolutely.
And sitting with Dinger
Yeah.
and learning about the county issues, and information comes from many, many, many different places. And I think it is our responsibility to find those sources from across the township that can provide that information from decades and decades and decades. And I have found that most people are happy to share their experience, because public service is something that becomes a piece of you and it never goes away. And that becomes a part of you. So when you ask people for, hey, what was that experience like? I have found that they're genuinely available for it. And it's not just politicians from across Springwater. I have found much value in learning from our volunteers, learning from our stakeholders, learning from different community champions. There's so much knowledge in this township and there's so much history and our roots do run deep. And you were right, there has been many, many amalgamations. I can go downstairs in my basement and find articles from when Reeve Coughlin served terms and there's stories about him burning the dump on Sundays. There's a lot of information that comes from there and it's our responsibility to learn that. And I'm not suggesting that while I personally, this forum is not providing me with the same benefit as maybe other members of council, it doesn't mean that I don't value information. It just means that this forum is not something that I am finding personally to be beneficial to the township. I do have Alexander and Thompson, Fisher and Garwood.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Coughlin. So I do completely agree with you. I think there's many different avenues we can get history, knowledge, educate ourselves. We spoke with that when this resolution or this motion first came forward and reaching out to other members to see if that have sat on council and if they wanted to come speak. And I think we were all in favor of that. I think I'm not going to go down the road because I know my parameters now. The conversation when this motion came up, there was a lot of confusion with respect to the wording and where we were going. A lot of that conversation revolved around the City of Barrie annexation. Personally, for me, that was my reasoning for voting in favor of this because I felt that there was an opportunity for us to learn from someone who has a great deal of expertise in that area. I understand we're not allowed to talk about that tonight, so I won't go there, but we can't ignore that piece of why we got to where we are right now. I am a bit confused with respect to the conversation around timeline and whether Mr. Georges can come back or not. My assumption, and please correct me if I'm wrong or explain, Clerk Ainsworth, was that we approved a retainer of up to $10,000 to work with Mr. Georges. We were not ever anticipating to spend $10,000 in one evening, contrary to Facebook. That was never the plan. The plan was to have a retainer to be able to continually use the services. So do we actually have to put a motion on the table to have them come back and speak? I'm confused.
I will turn to Clerk Ainsworth, please.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. I'll read part of the motion that was passed on April 3rd. The motion that was originally tabled was slightly amended before it was ultimately voted on. So the motion states that Tony Georges Consulting be retained to provide training and education in order to assist council with relevant background information relating to the history of the township, and that council authorize billable hours up to $10,000 to contract Tony Georges Consulting with funds to be drawn from the tax rate stabilization fund. The piece regarding the retainer was removed and it was replaced with billable hours up to the $10,000. So there has been no retainer provided. It's just as provided and as billed on an hourly basis. That was the parameters surrounding what was actually approved by council.
Follow on?
Okay, so in order to have another meeting, we don't necessarily have to provide direction, is what my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if we want to change the direction of the history lesson versus potential education on how to move forward with the City of Barrie, potentially that needs to be changed to have those discussions. Is that what I'm understanding?
Clerk Ainsworth?
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. As far as the resolution states, this evening's session would satisfy the piece about the history of the township. Should council wish to see anything further, direction would be required to schedule subsequent meetings.
I have Councillor Thompson and then Fisher.
Through the chair to, is it Mr. Georges or Gurgis? I've heard both tonight.
Yeah,
I just
no,
wanna
it's fine.
say your name
Either
properly.
work. Georges. is the
Georges,
pronunciation. Yes,
okay, thank you. So through the.
Appreciate that.
Through
Thank
the
you.
chair to Mr. Georges. the information that Mr. Georges has, I think, is accessible to all of us. He just said that he's spoken to each of us, and I had called him yesterday, and he was so kind enough to take my call and spend some time on the phone with me. And yeah, you know, I'm not saying the information that he has isn't important and may be helpful to some of us. So I would suggest, if you would like that information, to pick up the phone and give him a call. He's very chatty. He can talk for a long time and share this information, and you will be able to have this information to help you if and when we ever get to a negotiation or are able to have any discussion with the city of Barrie about any boundary changes.
Counselor Fisher?
I hear Councillor Thompson say information, but what I'm interested in is actually experience. And I think that you'd have to be living under a rock to not know what we're really talking about tonight. We're talking about issues with the city of Barrie, and I'll leave it at that. What Mr. Georges is here is not as much as it is a history lesson, and it's very interesting. It is a prelude to discussions that mine him for his experience. And to me, it's not an information session or a history lesson, as has been said. You know, I value one's experience, regardless of anyone's opinions. Their experience is valuable. I also, you know, I've heard it said around this table by every one of us that, you know, we want to be armed with information about a multitude of different topics during our term. And this is no different. As a matter of fact, I think this is paramount. We want to have as much information, to the mayor's point, as possible from as many sources. So I value experience that I personally don't have. I don't think anyone on this council does, right? So this is a prelude to something else, something bigger, and frankly, something very important. I will say too, and I know it's not the parameters of our discussion tonight, is probably the single most important thing in Springwater's history thus far. It really spells out the future. And so for that reason, I see Mr. Georges' experience as an asset, and I would like to have a continued meeting. I don't know if we need to set a date for it, but I would like to have as much information as possible, and everybody on this council should want the same thing.
Thank you. And before I do go to Councillor Garwood, the suggestion that you would have to be under a rock to know what we're talking about tonight, that's the purpose of a resolution and an agenda, is so that people do know what we're talking about. So whether this is a prelude to another conversation or not, I think it's the responsibility of this council. If we're going to have a discussion about the city of Barrie, let's have it, but let's have it with a resolution that provides information to our residents. There should not be a prelude or an understanding that that's what we're talking about. The resolution clearly stated that. So again, as stated earlier, if council wants to move in that direction, it would just simply be another motion of council that is open and transparent to the public. Councillor Garwood.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. Councillor Fisher, part of that I agree with in regards to, I think a lot of folks know why we're here tonight, and it is the city of Barrie, and that's because when this motion was brought forward, there was a map of the city of Barrie brought up on a screen. So the word narrow focus, as previously noted in this discussion, absolutely is not true, because the intention, whether or not it's what's in the original motion, which is a history lesson, the intention was to gather information for a discussion with the city of Barrie, because multiple members up here tonight have noted that. Also, to clarify a few items. Yes, we absolutely should always gather information. I'm the one that sits up here and talks about data-driven decisions and how we should be looking at data before we make those decisions. But at what cost? The deputy mayor spoke about information. I don't disagree with you, Deputy Mayor Cabral, but I disagree with spending taxpayer dollars over and over and over again on something that, in my mind, we can pick up the phone, as Councillor Thompson noted, and have that discussion. In addition to that, it was also noted around sitting here talking about who we can and who we cannot talk to. There was direction provided at this council table a week ago, telling this council to not have a discussion with the provincial facilitator. So exactly what was just noted, what the deputy mayor just noted, is what was brought forward last week. We did provide direction to not move forward and have a discussion. So I just need to provide that clarification that that is what we have done here often.
I have Counselor Thompson, Moore, and Deputy Correll.
Through the chair to Councillor Moore, so seeing that this was your motion at last week at the meeting, was it your intent that this motion lead us to discussions about the boundary with the city of Barrie and to lead us back into discussions with the city of Barrie?
Counselor Moore?
Thank you. The original motion, and I will recall it like I did that day. It was meant to be an opportunity for this council to learn from Mr. Georges and the first 10 years of this township, because we are only a 30-year-old township. And that we, along with our very brand new senior management team, would be armed with all of the information that we could be to get us started as a group toward a productive conversation. I will say that it was not my intention to put that map up on the board that day. I had no idea. That was not part of my motion. But I would like to, while I'm speaking, address a couple of things. First, the cost. I think the cost is relative to the information that we know. So the more information we know, the less the cost will be to this township. And I will ask the clerk, I wasn't necessarily going to post this, but I'll ask the clerk to put up on the board the cost of a provincial facilitator.
Thank you.
And it is listed on the Ontario website. This is easy to find information. But I think it really speaks to,
My apologies.
Yeah.
So at the last meeting, when there was something put up on the screen that I was not aware of. As chair, it's difficult to disseminate whether that information is relative or not. So after that
Okay.
meeting, I did have a conversation with the clerk about if there's information that members of council would like to have put on the screen to be put forward. If members of council could just make sure that myself and the clerk are aware of that prior to the meeting, so we're not. And like you said, if you have a motion and someone else puts information up during it, it
Yeah.
changes the perception of it. So yes, there's a certain cost and there's different costs, and this is the cost that this council has decided on. So is this information?
it is, I think it's important. I think because we seem to be obsessing about the cost for Mr. Georges to be here. Recognizing too that Mr. Georges works full-time. So to pick up the phone and just contact somebody is a bit presumptuous that they can just be available and willing to talk to all 7 members of council at great length. But it is his free time after hours. It would be in the evening. But the facilitator piece, this is really what I wanted to put up on the screen. I did let the clerk know. Just speaks, and I can read it out loud.
Thank you.
That the chair for the facilitators earn a $1,200 per diem up to $280,000 annually. $280,000. That's a lot of money. If they work part-time, it's $234,000 annually. And then appointees are reimbursed for work-related expenses in accordance with the travel, meal, and hospitality expenses directive. So assuming then we don't arm ourselves with all the information possible, we are looking at a facilitator to walk us through many steps that we probably don't need to pay for at this very expensive cost. I don't know, and I wasn't able to find who reimburses or where this costs. I mean, it isn't a provincial appointee, so you assume then the province is paying for it. I don't know then if we are responsible to reimburse a portion of that because we request the facilitator's assistance. But regardless, it's all taxpayer money. We're all paying for it. So I think, relatively speaking, Mr. Georges is very inexpensive. If we can learn strategies about what happened potentially with Innisfil, I would like to know how that played out. I would like to know what happened with the 13 annexations, if that's possible. There is more information that I would like. And if that is in closed session, then I suggest then we have to move into closed session to best arm this council.
And before I do, move to that. Again, the discussion of a facilitator is specific
Mhm.
to the city of Barrie. So I am gonna end that portion of it, but I will, just because when we say things out loud at this table, I don't want the residents of the municipality to think that we're gonna get a $280,000 bill or a 12,000. So I'm gonna go to CAO Schmidt to speak to how the costs are covered by a facilitator.
Thank you, Mayor Coggan, through you two members of council. So based on the website, the provincial website, the remuneration for the chair receives a $1,200 per diem up to $280,000 annually. And there's additional information there. My understanding is that is not a cost to the township or to the municipality. It is a provincial cost that they absorb. Again, understanding the conversation we had at the last meeting last week, this is a voluntary process. So you're not forced into this. It's up to you whether or not you want to participate. So to me, and I believe Orem Adante's report today, I think it's today's report, I believe speaks to the idea that it's not a cost to the municipality. So I believe both us and Orem Adante have the same understanding. When I had my discussion with the provincial facilitator, there was no discussion about cost.
Thank you. And just as a follow-on to the second point about closed session information. Closed session information that you would have received during your term or participated in closed session. That information, and again, just for members of the public, that information that you discussed in closed session a couple decades ago, are you then able to come to this council, resolve into closed and share that information with us? Or is that information under all the different acts, information that can just never be spoke of again? Mr. Georges.
Thank you, Your Worship. In response to that, my understanding is that for the good of this corporation, the information that was shared with me in closed session can be shared with the leadership of the current administration in closed session. So as a consultant, I can share that with you in closed session.
And I will turn maybe to the clerk or maybe not, but so information that you received as warden of Simcoe County or mayor,
Sorry.
as mayor of this municipality,
Yes.
in your capacity as a consultant. So in your consultant firm, you would be able to use information you received as mayor and then turn around as a consultant and provide it back to us?
Just to clarify, Your Worship, so I can't, no different than closed session at NBCA or any other board that you're representing. That information is closed session relevant to that information. And so, yes, it is my choice as a consultant to come back and share that information. I could do that as a retired individual. I appreciate the comment. I am still gainfully employed. I don't know if other members of past council are retired and able to do what they do in their spare time for free. I still, as was alluded to work. So in that capacity, yes, you're quite correct. That would be how that would roll out.
And just as a follow-on, so the experience you had as mayor with dealing with annexations, the information that you received in closed session during that time, it is of your opinion that you would then be able to share it with this council and that you would not be held to closed session proprietary information.
That's my understanding, yes.
Clerk Ainsworth?
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. Yes, council, whether a closed session item happened within their term or a previous term, are privileged to that information. It would be up to Mr. Georges to advise council which information he is comfortable expressing in closed or expressing in open, but council is able to receive that information from Mr. Georges.
Thank you. And in as capacity as mayor, but not as warden. Thank you. And then I do have a lineup. That was, I lost it. Back to Councillor Thompson and then Councillor Moore, Deputy Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. So just my comment about communicating with Mr. Georges. He was so kind of a couple of weeks ago to give me a call and said I could call him anytime and that I had access to him. So unless that has changed, and if it is, please let me know and let us know. Second question through the chair to Councillor Moore. So with your original motion and the map, you said you didn't have knowledge of the map. Do you have any idea then how the map showed up in your motion?
Councillor Moore?
Yes, to be frank, I arrived that day for our meeting and another counselor asked me if it was possible to add the map. Thought that that would be helpful for everybody for clarity, and I agreed.
I have Councillor Moore and then Deputy, and then Deputy Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin, and I'll say that I was the member of council that did that because at that point in time, I thought that that was a relevant piece, even though the motion was kind of a little bit muddled. But what I'm hearing right now is we're okay to talk to Mr. Gurgis at it's not going to be for free, Mr. Thompson. So 7 of us giving Mr. Gurgis a telephone call is a lot more than Mr. Gurgis coming to speak to us and answering pointed questions that this council may have. So what I'm hearing is, well, we can talk to him, but we don't want him to actually come to another meeting and provide us with any information, which what I'm hearing right now is that there is fulsome information to be had from Mr. Gurgis under the right circumstances and under the right settings. Now, the way I look at Mr. Gurgis, you know, he's a racing car driver, Formula One. He's been the warden, he's been the mayor, he's been part of the annexation with Innisfil and Barrie. And I'm sure he has very good insight on the entire process, what missteps this council might make and what advantages this council might gain. And I think that that is relevant information. In addition to that, we have already retained Mr. Gurgis. So with everything that's coming towards us next Wednesday, hopefully we're going to get a report from staff. At that point in time, what this council does after that, I'm very of the mind that there's going to have to be some closed session discussions take place about it, the same as Oral Medonti has done. So what I think everybody was afraid I just wanted another presentation by Mr. Gurgis, but what I'd really like to put forward is something along the lines of Mr. Gurgis be able to assist us as required in ongoing council discussions regarding council's ongoing questions, however you want to phrase it, with respect to the potential boundary adjustment or annexation. And that's what I'd like to put forward. I'd like to have Mr. Gurgis as a resource for council down the road when we get our information from staff. So that's what I'd like to put on the table. I'm not looking for a specific date. I'm just looking for Mr. Gurgis to be able to speak more freely outside of the narrow scope of a history lesson per se, but actually address some of the concerns that members of this council have about the entire process going forward. And if anybody on here doesn't think that that is something that we should do, I kind of have to struggle with that because once again, you're right, Mayor Coughlin, we should get information from everyone. But if I can get information from the person who's been through it all, that's a fantastic resource. And I'd be foolish to not take advantage of it. As a matter of fact, that would be very irresponsible to do that, to not take advantage of it. So I don't know how we can phrase that, but that's what I'd like to propose. I think it gives Mr. Gurgis opportunity to provide us with valuable information, far more than what people have thought about as a history lesson, which I must admit, you certainly enlightened me.
Thank you. So at the time that council, and I do have Councillor Alexander next, at the time that council chooses to move forward with a secondary session about the city of Barrie and negotiations, at that time, council could just simply put a resolution, much like we did previously, to rehire or hire.
Mayor Coughlin,
And
I'd like
again,
to do it
Deputy
right
Cabral,
now.
and just as in the last meeting,
Yeah.
when you speak, I do listen. I don't put on my microphone and interrupt you.
Fair enough,
So
Mayor
again-
Coughlin, but when I'm finished asking about that, it seems that you seem to steer it somewhere else. So I'm asking for that resolution
And
to be
again-
put on the table.
And again,
Thank you.
I am a member of this public, of this table and I do have opportunity to speak. And so this was my opportunity to speak and I was simply, Clerk Ainsworth is continuing to write down everything that everyone's saying. There has not been a formal resolution, an amendment or a motion that's been put forward. Whether or not we amend what we had before, so it would probably be the discretion of the clerk. But I was simply providing my opinion. That's what I was doing. Councillor Alexander.
Okay, so I don't want to have an individual conversation with Mr. Georges. No disrespect. I don't want us to have 7 individual conversations. I want us to get the staff report that is hopefully coming next meeting regarding Councillor Thompson's reconsideration that added Deputy Cabral's amendment to it regarding the potential annexation. I want to continue to engage Mr. Georges for his expertise with respect to how we can move forward with this. So at the end of the day, we as 7 people can sit together as a council at this table and develop a strategy on how we are going to move forward with the city of Barrie, not individually, as a table, as a council, and then move forward with that. If we want the provincial facilitator, if we want to move with the county, if we want to move with Oro Medani, if we want to stay on our own, we're going in 20 different directions right now with something that is so important, and we need to get together as one at this table and have the discussions.
Thank you. And like we said, the information that is being requested is going to be coming forward next week. At this time, council has decided, it's interesting because we're trying to put forward a motion that says we want to have conversations with Mr. Georges, but we also have existing resolutions that say we don't want to have conversations with Mayor Nuttall, and we don't want to have conversations with a provincial facilitator. So at this time, if the idea is to wait for the information, I don't see why there needs to be any need for any other notice of motion or amendment. We simply wait for the information that we're going to be receiving a week from now, and then we create a path forward at that time. I have CAO Schmidt and then Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Mayor Coden. Just to maybe clarify on the contract that's being executed between the township and Mr. Georges. So there's a discussion here tonight that there's a one and done kind of thing, if you will. Essentially, it's the expiry is at the direction of council. So essentially, you have a contract with Mr. Georges, and all that staff is looking for is give us some direction as to how you want to proceed with next steps. So whether that's tonight or whether that's at a future meeting, essentially, Mr. Georges, the contract is there. Should council wish to engage further, you have the ability to do so.
Thank you for that clarification. I have Councillor Fisher and Deputy Cabral.
2 things. One, I think sometimes we focus on trivial things to prove our own points here in council. Maybe I'm guilty of it too. I was happy the map was up the other day. I know some people are making something of it, but I was happy the map was up the other day because I think that's very important to the people of Springwater, and I wish more people saw it and more people talked about it. This is very serious, and I think that map was highly relevant. And I personally have had multiple discussions with people in my ward and actually throughout Springwater because of that map being up. I think it was very enlightening for people. The other point, cost of the facilitator versus the cost of Mr. Georges being in front of us. It's a very small amount to gain this type of local knowledge from Mr. Georges. The cost of the facilitator, that's an exorbitant amount of money. And I know that it's been tossed around here that, oh, that's provincial. We're still provincial taxpayers. We're still taxpayers provincially. So $280,000 up to $1,200 per diem to wade into a negotiation that in many people's opinions, they don't want to be part of. I think that's what we need to be focusing on. It's not something I want to pay, even as a provincial taxpayer. So those are my 2 opinions. Thank you.
Thank you. I would agree that it is a highly relevant conversation. I think that the discussion could be that it was not transparent. We told the public we were going to be discussing one thing, and then the map went up when we started having a conversation about something different. That's the only concern I have about with that is the transparency. And Councillor Fisher and then Deputy Cabral.
Mayor Coughlin, it's not lost on me that just about every time I have something to say, you have a follow-up for me, right? And I understand you're the chair, but it's gone on for over a year now, right? And I feel that you stick handle as chair and you take advantage of your position as chair. when I have an opinion and I state it, I don't need it to be frankly ripped apart or stick handled before it goes on to the rest of council. So I take offense to it. It's happened multiple times and I have been okay with it, but it's become a trend and I'd like it to stop.
I have Deputy Cabral, then Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. I guess through you to CAO Schmidt. I think my concern here is that going down the road, even though the contract is in existence, would we have to collectively as a council determine that we would like Mr. Gurgis present at any particular meeting, or would that just be something that a member of council could request, or based on dialogue with staff and Mr. Gurgis, that there be some agreement that Mr. Gurgis be at a specific meeting? That would be my piece, because the only reason for asking for the resolution is to keep the door open for Mr. Gurgis to be able to provide that expertise on a totally different aspect of his experience, which is not a history lesson, but his engagement in the past on annexation. So that's kind of what I want to know. And you're right, Mayor Coughlin, the facilitator piece is coming down the road. All of this is coming down the road. And at some point in time, as Councillor Alexander has indicated, the seven of us are going to have to sit down and figure out what we're going to do with everything that we're going to be provided with. Because right now, I've got this. I don't know about you guys, but that's what I got. And until next week, that's all I'm going to have. And I'm not about to go negotiate with this. It's as simple as that. So I would ask you, CAO Schmidt, if the contract is in place, it would literally take all of council to cancel it then at this stage of the game, would be number one. And number two is, what would the process be to bring Mr. Gurgis in to say a closed session meeting to ask those questions that we really want to ask, but we're not in a position to do so here?
Thank you. CAO Schmidt.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. Through you to Deputy Mayor. So Deputy Mayor, you're correct. The contract is with the township and essentially council has endorsed that contract. So as far as I'm concerned, it's up to the will of council as to how you wish to proceed, whether you want to continue with that contract or not. Essentially, your second point, I think, again, it's at the will of council as to what are the next steps that you wish to proceed with Mr. Georges. And I guess from a staff perspective, you know, to provide us with direction as to how you wish that to proceed. If you want us to be involved with organizing another meeting with Mr. Georges, we need some direction to be able to do so. Essentially, the direction right now is just, we provided, as the clerk mentioned, we've arranged for tonight's session. If there's another session that you wish to entertain, we would just need some direction to make sure that we're following what your desire is.
Thank you. And follow on and the follow on.
Yeah, thank you, CAO Schmidt. And I think that's the piece is it's difficult to provide any direction today because we're backed up waiting on things to still happen down the road. So I guess what I'm really asking council is, do we need to make that decision today, or, you know, are we able to entertain it after we get the report from staff and determine where we're going to go? I guess what I want to do is not close the door on the opportunity that Mr. Gurgis could provide us with some resourceful information. But if, I mean, that's where I sit right now. It's
Councillor,
causing a lot of grief here just deciding about this, so.
thank you. And before I do go to Councillor Thompson, yes, so the only redirection that I believe staff and this council would need is that to include the city of Barrie for negotiations. The contract is with the consulting firm, but I don't believe in the contract is there parameters as to the discussion, or was it simply through resolution? Because if it would really just take us amending last week's motion to include negotiations pertaining to the city of Barrie, that could be simple. And as far as whether or not staff can reach out, if staff can reach out, meetings can be called by petition of council and by the will of the chair. And I did have Councillor at the indulgence of Councillor Thompson.
Well, I was going to propose a motion to cancel the contract with Mr. Georges.
So there has been discussion on both. So there has been discussion from 3 members of council now of different proposals. The direction Counselor Thompson, you always just have to add that. I'm just trying to navigate this. Earlier this evening, it was Counselor Alexander and Deputy Cabral were looking for a way to ensure that we could simply have, should council wish to have Mr. Georges back, that the parameters of that did not confine us to that. So I think that that would be the first discussion as to how Clerk Ainsworth, can we open it up so that the next time, should council wish to have Mr. Georges back, that the discussion can be about negotiations with the city of Barrie. Clerk Ainsworth and then Deputy Cabral.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. This evening's motion, simply to receive the presentation, could be amended for additional council direction to add certain provisions on what council would like to retain Mr. Georges for. That would satisfy any future potential motions, or sorry, my apologies, any potential future meetings that council would like to see.
Deputy Cabral.
Well, thank you, Mayor Coughlin. I'm just, that sounds fine, but I think that if we're going to include City of Barrie, we would need to also include Oro Medonte and also County of Simcoe, if we were going to talk about negotiations. So as Clerk Ainsworth has pointed out, that just basically gives it carte blanche to move forward, and Mr. Georges will be able to work with us. We don't need to identify specifics. Is that what I'm hearing?
I have Clerk Ainsworth, Counselor Alexander, and Counselor Moore.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. And based on the Deputy Mayor's previous debate, I have been drafting something to that he could potentially propose. That council, my apologies, I have a few notes here. That council direct that Tony Georges Consulting continue to be retained to assist the township as required in ongoing discussions with respect to potential boundary adjustments / annexation. And that any future special meetings be scheduled in closed session if topics meet permissions within the Municipal Act and if required. That would give a bit of a broader scope regarding the specific townships or the county, as you mentioned.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin, through you. Yes, I'm very happy with that, and it works for me. I'd like to propose that.
Thank you. I have Counselor Alexander and Counselor Moore, and then I'll turn back to Deputy Cabral for a seconder.
So thank you, Clerk Ainsworth. I think that covers at least what I was looking for. The only other question I have is with respect to the next meeting. If we have this type of motion on the floor, can staff say, okay, can we just get a next meeting on the agenda, or do we have to do a petition of council, which then takes up another meeting and then allows for everything to go on Facebook again? I would prefer to just get this dealt right now and not every time we would like to have a meeting, have to have a petition of council, which then just allows the spin that occurs on Facebook and social media.
Counselor Moore.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. I think that it's a little unfair to continue this conversation without asking Mr. Georges his availability, first of all, and his willingness to cooperate with council's requests. Is that something that you would be interested in? It's not a conversation that we have had, so I'd like to hear what your thoughts are.
Mr. Georges.
Through you, your worship, I am sort of working this through in my head as to what's being proposed and suggested. And my availability, first of all, is for evening meetings is much better than during the day. So I would certainly make time for that. In terms of, I mean, I would like to hear the parameters as well. I've been clear that there are, certain items within the township of Springwater that I can comfortably disclose and assist. Hopefully, they provide you 7 elected officials, some insight and help prepare you for the road ahead. Again, I'm comfortable to do that.
Following Counselor Moore.
Thank you. Then I will second Deputy Mayor Cabral's motion.
I'll have Clerk Ainsworth, reread the amendment, please.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. And I just one point to potentially answer Councillor Alexander's question regarding the scheduling of the meeting. The motion that I drafted, because through the debate, there was a lot of discussion of once the staff reports that have been requested are received. So the draft amendment does include with a meeting to be scheduled once staffing reports requested on the matter come forward. I do also have to ask if CAO Schmidt has any additional recommendations for the amendment or potential wording adjustments.
CEO Schmidt,
Thank you, Mayor Coggan, through you to Clerk Ainsworth. Clerk Ainsworth, can you just read it again? Just, thank you.
Clerk Ainsworth,
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. The amendment would read that the motion now before council be amended as follows to add, and that council direct that Tony Georges Consulting continue to be retained to assist the township as required in ongoing discussions with respect to potential boundary adjustments / annexation, with a meeting to be scheduled once staffing reports requested on the matter come forward, and that any future special meetings be scheduled in closed session if topics meet permissions within the Municipal Act and if required.
CEO Schmidt. Nothing further.
Thank you, Mayor Coggan. I'm okay with that.
Councillor Garwood.
Recorded vote, please.
Thank you. I know we have this. And Clerk Ainsworth, is there any further discussion on the amendment as proposed? Not seeing any, I will turn to Clerk Ainsworth.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. Would anyone like the motion reread? That the motion now before council be amended as follows, and to clarify, the main motion would be to receive the presentation. So this would add to that motion. To add, and that council direct that Tony Georges Consulting continue to be retained to assist the township as required in ongoing discussions with respect to potential boundary adjustment / annexation, with a meeting to be scheduled once staffing reports requested on the matter come forward, and that any future special meetings be scheduled in closed session if topics meet permissions within the Municipal Act and if required.
Clerk Ainsworth. Oh, CEO Schmidt.
Thank you, Mayor Coggan, and through you to Clerk Ainsworth. I'm wondering whether or not there should be a slight amendment whereby boundary adjustments and annexations as it relates to the city of Barrie specifically.
And that's been entered. Thank you. So the slight amendment proposed by CEO Schmidt, which is just the adding in the city of Barrie, just to highlight which we're talking about. Council, do we need Clerk Ainsworth to read it again? And not seeing that, recorded vote has been called. Clerk Ainsworth.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. Once I state your name, please state yes or no. Councillor Garwood,
No.
Councillor Alexander,
Yes.
Councillor Thompson,
No.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Councillor Fisher,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cabral,
Yes.
and Mayor Coughlin.
No.
That vote is carried.
Thank you. So council, we do have, we're now back to the main motion. If there's anything further this evening with Mr. Georges. Not seeing it. At this time, I will call
Recorded vote, please.
Clerk Ainsworth. We will now move back to the main motion and a recorded vote has been called.
Thank you, Mayor Coughlin. This vote will be on the main motion as amended. Once I state your name, please state yes or no. Councillor Garwood,
No.
Councillor Alexander,
Yes.
Councillor Thompson,
No.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Councillor Fisher,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cabral,
Yes.
and Mayor Coughlin.
No,
That motion is carried.
thank you. We have a mover and seconder for the confirmation bylaw, please. Deputy Cabral and Councillor Moore, that bylaw 2020-037 to confirm and adopt the proceedings of council in the special meeting held on May 8th, 2024, listed here and be signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk. All those in favor? That has carried. Thank you very much for your presentation this evening. And at this time, I'll move for adjournment for a mover and seconder, please. Councilors Fisher and Moore. That the special meeting of the Township of Springwater does now adjourn at 8:07 PM to meet again in the regular meeting on May 15th, 2024 at 6:30 PM. All those in favor? And that has carried. Thank you.